The PlayStation 2 was no stranger to controversy. In fact, just looking at some of its advertising shows that, Sony almost welcomed it. But there were a lot of games that caused plenty of headlines, and not all for cross-clutching reasons. Now, I've decided to not highlight Manhunt today because, it's always mentioned, even by us. And also the Guy game, because I can't really show it considering it's entirely just,
Titties.
We all good? Solid. If you were a PS2 owner and a huge MGS fan in 2001, Metal Gear Solid 2 Sons of Liberty pulled off one of the greatest gotchas in video game history. Right, so the marketing was pure Solid Snake, right? Trailers and demos had him sneaking through oil tankers, flexing the PS2's firepower with the best visuals and finest details ever seen on a console. Magazines hyped it up like you'd be Solid Snake all the way because, well, they knew no better. Then the game came out and everyone's mind was blown, but not in the way many expected. You get through the tanker chapter and suddenly you're playing the rest of the game as... Raiden?
What the... You're a man?
Raiden wasn't just a new protagonist, he was the opposite of Snake, well, appearance-wise. Young, blonde, clean-cut, not a smoker, so less cool obviously, a bit, let's be honest too, whiny. Cue worldwide forum meltdown. Solid Snake was still around, of course. Solid Snake was still around, of course, but in a supporting role. Forums were flooded with players demanding to know why the beloved Snake was sidelined for this caked-up rookie. Kojima later admitted the whole thing was deliberate. He wanted to show Snake as a legendary figure through someone else's eyes and subvert expectations of who you play as in a Metal Gear game. At the time though, a lot of people weren't ready and the backlash was kinda loud for a bit. Looking back, it is pretty genius. What felt like a bait and switch in 2001 is now largely seen as one of the boldest narrative gambles in gaming, and it helped to make the franchise a much broader beast overall. There's a good chance that if Sons of Liberty hadn't completely changed my perception of games when I was young, this channel simply wouldn't exist. So blame Kojima for that. Alright, let's go from big shell to another kind of shell. Shellshock NAM 67 is a game that tried so hard to be edgy and authentic that it almost gave itself Trenchfoot. Released just a couple months before Killzone, this was Guerrilla Games' first big game, and they did kinda go for it. Shellshock pitched itself as the raw, uncut truth about Vietnam. The marketing talked up graphic violence, PTSD, war crimes, all that very not fun stuff. And yeah, there's gore. Lots of it, and lots of concerned parents. Dismembered corpses, landmines ripping guys apart, civilians caught in the crossfire. You name it, it wore that 18 rating like a badge of honour. The problem though, the actual game felt more like Platoon Leader and less like, Platoon. It had all the brutality but none of the, weight. It was just like, here's a guy's torso, isn't that shocking? Anyway, check out this other torso. Reviews tore into it for leaning on shock value without saying anything meaningful. In Australia, the classification board raised eyebrows over the torture scenes and almost banned it before a slightly cut version got through. I'm just going to imagine they didn't play it properly because this is without mentioning the fact that you can buy drugs and be entertained by female corner correspondents. It's no wonder that for a lot of players, especially younger teens at the time, Shellshock NAM 67 probably left quite the mark. I really remember loving it in a grim way, and even if it stumbled, you could argue Shellshock helped pave the way for the kinds of war stories games would start telling more seriously a few years later. I'm choosing to ignore the sequel. Anyway, let's leave Vietnam behind and talk about a game where the only thing getting blown up was whatever was left of Acclaim's reputation. If Shellshock tried to traumatise teenagers who shouldn't have really been playing it with gore, this one tried to save an entire publisher with nudity and fart jokes. And you'll never guess what, it absolutely didn't. By 2002, after a string of failures, Acclaim was circling the drain. Their big idea? Take their existing Dave Mirra Freestyle BMX series, strip out any last shred of credibility, and add tits. Out went Dave, and in came a lawsuit from Mirror, levels set in strip clubs, unlockable videos of real-life topless dancers, and a jackass edge without the hateable pain in the arse to tie it all together. Retailers hated it, Walmart refused to stock it, Australia outright banned it until Acclaim submitted a toned-down version with the FMV's cut. Even Sony reportedly forced content edits before allowing it on PS2. But surely sex sells, right? Well, for the first time ever, sex did not in fact sell. Critics panned it for being juvenile and lazy, and players just, didn't show up. The internet was speeding up a bit after all. Instead of saving Acclaim, BMX Triple H became their unofficial headstone with a couple of tassels on top. 2 years later, the company folded completely, leaving this as one of their last desperate flails for relevance, along with trying to pay parents to name their kids Turok. But hey, Jeff Jarrett now owns a revived Acclaim, so maybe we'll get BMX Triple X 2 Electric Boogaloo one of these days. Bully for them.
Just you wait, you'll be sorry. Hi there. Hey, don't hurt.
As you'll see later, I'm pretty sure Rockstar had a small kink for upsetting tabloids back in the day. Released in 2006, Bully was so controversial pre-launch that UK shops wouldn't even stock it under its original name. Here, as well as in other parts of Europe and Australia, it came out as Canis Canem Edit. That's dog eat dog in Latin. There are no dogs eating each other here though, what the hell? But here's the twist, Bully wasn't actually about bullying. You play as Jimmy Hopkins, a bumblebee-chewing lad who's been dumped at Bulworth Academy by his negligent mum and her new squeeze. And instead of picking on smaller kids, you spend most of the game fighting against the bullies, standing up for nerds and climbing the school's social ladder. Sure, there are pranks and the odd wedgie, but for a Rockstar game, it's surprisingly wholesome. Apart from the maths lessons, go to hell forever. That didn't stop the moral panic, of course. Jack Thompson, the infamous anti-video game lawyer, called it a Columbine simulator, which is just not true. There are no guns here, Jack. Brazil banned it completely, calling it a threat to public order. Like, did these people even play a video game ever? No? Yeah, thought as much. But as you can no doubt hear from the soundtrack right now, critics and players loved it. Under the hood, it's GTA with water balloons and slingshots, featuring a clever sandbox that really teaches you the importance of having a second job. Today it's fondly remembered as one of Rockstar's most creative departures from the grim of Liberty City and the neon of Vice City, and I'd give 100 nerds a swirly if it meant we finally got that sequel. Come what may, we will get a Bully 2. One day. Probably. Maybe.
Time to sell it.
Everyone who got near the back of their gaming magazines back in the day probably remembers Leisure Suit Larry magna cum laude. It's the PS2 era reboot of Sierra's long-running series about everyone's favourite polyester-loving sleazeball. But does sex still sell when Larry is the one selling it? If this man turned up at your doorstep with a suitcase full of sex, would you buy the sex? Well, Censorboards didn't. In the US, the original version got slapped with an adults-only rating, thanks to its abundance of nudity, sex jokes, suggestive minigames, and barroom banter. Since retailers hate AO-rated games, Sierra trimmed out the explicit bits so it could get the more palatable M rating. Later on, they released an uncut version on PC titled Uncut and Uncensored, restoring the explicit bits and bobs. Down in Australia Down Under though, nope. It was banned outright for sexuality and nudity in relation to incentives and rewards. That meant no official PS2 version ever hit Aussie shelves, though rumour has it some bootleg discs still circulate. Someone please check in on the Leisure Suit Larry black market please. But how is it to actually play? Well, gameplay wise, it's pretty basic mini-games tied to seduction set around college life, and there's little cartoon sperm. Critics said it leaned too heavily on shock humour and repetitive tasks, calling it more a game set on a treadmill than an adventure. Magna Cum Laude was an American Pie-infused, half-cocked return to the Larry formula that was edgy, awkward, and trying way too hard. But if you were 11 years old when it came out, this was probably your Citizen Kane. Hey, talking about getting it up.
What now, son?
This one isn't as controversial as you'd expect, considering the guy who co-produced the music. Published by Atari, which is kind of odd on its own, right? Mark echoes getting up content under pressure is hands down one of the most early 2000s names for a video game ever, and the game itself is equally of its time. It's beautiful. This was fashion designer Mark Echo's attempt to merge street art culture, hip-hop, and a nice dash of urban rebellion into a PS2 action-adventure. The story follows Train, an aspiring graffiti artist fighting an authoritarian regime in the fictional city of New Radius. You tag walls, you dodge cops, and beat the hell out of rival gangs, while a surprisingly stacked voice cast, including Rosario Dawson, cheers you on. For a game about painting walls, a lot of punching too. Predictably, for the time, the concept didn't sit well with certain groups. Some politicians accused it of glorifying vandalism and gang violence, and the Australian Classification Board banned it completely, citing explicitly linking graffiti with crime. Just because I explicitly make food in Overcooked, it does not mean I am a chef. Australia. In the US, New York politicians made noise about its influence on youth, but the game still hit shelves uncut. Looking back, this was a weird but ambitious mix of platforming, stealth, and combat. It's kind of like Jet Set meets Prince of Persia, and I remember digging it when I was young. Critics were divided, as some praised its originality, others felt it played more like a marketing campaign for Mark Echo's brand than a fully realised game. But love it or not, it remains a pretty unique time capsule that you can actually try out for yourself on Steam for a couple of quid. Now, I did kind of want to skip including GTA in the video, but that'd be like having coffee without, the awkward sex mini game. Wherever there was PS2 controversy, Grand Theft Auto wasn't far behind. GTA 3, Vice City, and San Andreas basically stirred the pot with a pneumatic drill, and then kicked it to death. Starting with GTA 3 in 2001, Rockstar ripped the handbrake off and let players loose in a fully 3D open-world crime sandbox. This was an absolute watershed moment for me as a kid. I'll never forget the Banshee in that showroom. And look at me now, I'm fine. Probably. Politicians went ballistic though. UK tabloids wet themselves, and Australia's rating boards refused classification until edits were made. Vice City upped the ante with 80s neon cocaine cartels and a soundtrack so good that it may still be the best the series has ever seen, or well, heard. But it caught flack for some writing and was briefly pulled from shelves in some regions for it. And then there's San Andreas. Sheesh. While not strictly on PS2, the hidden hot coffee minigame unlocked via PC mods ignited lawsuits, led to an AO rating in the US, and forced Rockstar to issue a patched version to get it back on shelves. Australia banned it entirely, and several European countries demanded content changes before release. All of that for about 12 pixels awkwardly clanging together, I mean honestly now. Every time some politician wagged a finger at violent video games corrupting our youth, odds were good that someone at Rockstar was laughing all the way to the bank. Punchline definitely didn't with this next game though. This here is the perfect example of what happens when moral watchdogs can't get their hands on GTA, so they go after something smaller and weirder instead. Released in 2006, this PS2 survival horror game from Punchline, the makers of that sweet kissing game, was instantly buried under a heap of controversy. The story follows Jennifer, a young woman trapped in a nightmarish orphanage run by cruel Lord of the Flies style children. Typically not the best style of children, it's bleak, unsettling, and dripped in psychological horror. It's a good, sometimes clunky game, well worth a look. But in the month leading up to release, European tabloids exploded with headlines about child torture and underage eroticism that all stemmed from a complete lie of an article in Italy. Politicians called for bans, and religious groups decried it as depraved filth corrupting youth. None of it was true. The game contains no sexualized depictions of children, and while the themes are disturbing, they're far tamer than what was claimed. But the narrative had already spun out of control. Australia refused classification, and the release of the game in the UK was cancelled. Sony even distanced itself from the game despite initially agreeing to distribute it in the United States. It felt like these censors couldn't quite stop GTA, but they sure as hell could crush this niche Japanese horror game no one in Parliament had ever heard of, seen or played. Ironically, the controversy turned Rule of Rose into a cult classic, and prices for it boomed. Someone last year actually found a massive load of sealed PAL copies that had been held back in storage. Now the prices are a bit better, but it's still one of the most wanted games on PS2. America's 10 Most Wanted is the kind of game you'd find in a bargain bin between a £1 DVD of Stealth and a knockoff controller for Pro Evolution Soccer 6. Hell yeah, released in 2004, this is a budget FPS where you hunt down global terrorists, including, yes, Osama bin Laden. Jessica Chastain hadn't got round to it yet. America's 10 Most Wanted, or the slightly less cool Fugitive Hunter in the US itself, went all in on turning the war on terror into a cartoonish shooting gallery. You blast through airports, deserts and office buildings while a soundtrack of B-list rap blares in the background. But wait, it also suddenly turns into Tekken when you hunt down those fugitives, and I've never loved anything more. Maybe Saddam Hussein having his own giant bomb character page, actually. I love that so much. The controversy was about as predictable as the ending of Lincoln, but maybe not quite as wild as it could have been. Saddam himself was actually removed from the American version due to, all that war stuff. A few people slammed it as tasteless exploitation of real-world tragedies, but most could see that the game was buried in like the 8th layer of irony. Some retailers quietly refused to stock it, maybe largely due to it being straight cheeks, but in the UK you can still find it on Woolworths shelves right next to Celebrity Deathmatch. The game was rough with clunky controls, laughable AI and graphics that barely looked above a PS1 game in a lot of places. But as weird as it was, America's 10 Most Wanted is a game that I'd never ever get a physical release on a console anymore, and for that alone it is worth treasuring. Right then, let's see what we've whipped up for today's last game.
I'll get you.
Okay, so Whiplash didn't create the darkest controversy of the PS2 era, but it still managed to rile up a few people who just wanted to kinda get annoyed. You play as Spanx the Weasel and Redmond the Rabbit, who are literally chained together like your favourite streamer's favourite rage slop. You'll be busting out of an evil animal testing lab by wrecking everything in sight and, yes, swaying the rabbit around like a flail. Reviewers liked the anarchic concept, but the repetitive combat and clunky controls held it back. IGN said it was worth renting, while GameStop described it as fun in short bursts, but shallow overall. On Metacritic it sits in the high 60s, which is just about respectable enough, but it's no cow with a kangaroo, is it? The RSPCA and even the UK's House of Commons Science Committee weren't impressed though. Miserable bastards said it turned real-world animal cruelty into slapstick comedy, trivialising abuse for cheap laughs. Eidos, the publishers, pushed back, insisting the game was meant as a satire that actually raised awareness of animal testing. Here's the twist for you. PETA itself, they of hypocrisy fame, gave the game a weird sort of like semi-thumbs up kind of thing. While they criticised the cartoon violence, they admitted it had potential to make players think about animal rights. I feel very conflicted right now. It's a strange footnote for a game where you use a bunny to electrocute guards and smash lab equipment, and proof that they didn't actually play any games. You should play Whiplash on your nearest software for digital recreation of physical goods journey though. It is a fun, dumb game. Want to hear the biggest controversy of them all? There will be no outro gang today.